we have some great partners. Without those partners, we would not be here. We did get a great grant. It took about 5 years to get the grant, but until then, these folks kept us going, many of them. And then we did get a visit from the governor, and he did bring us a nice size check. We're now trying to give that back to the community. And as you saw in the ad, if you sign up tonight, you can get up to $900 back out of that grant for your landscaping or riprap work. Up to right toggle. These partners have done a lot of financial supporting and volunteering. And again, this place would not have taken place tonight without all of these folks on board helping us out. And you can see here we have Ameren, Schultz Surveying, Ron Dugan from Sunrise Title gives us office space, the master naturalists, the master gardeners, of course on board. Lake TV is here tonight. Thank you for being here, Lake TV. By the way, during our question and answer, I'll repeat the questions so then we can have it, a nice recording of this event. Okay, thank you. You want me over here?
At the podium.
At the podium? By the podium. Okay. If I get behind the podium, maybe I should, I'll just disappear. No. I do wear flats. You get to this age, you no longer worry about those high heels when you're a short critter to make yourself taller. But anyway, so we have a lot of wonderful partners. Many of them are here tonight to make this event happen. And again, it's a wonderful, wonderful experience to work with all the great people here at the lake. And that's what makes this happen. Tonight, Landscape for a Healthy Lake. I'm so proud, and it could almost bring tears. Dave Tilka's here. I had the pleasure of listening to a presentation of his, and I thought, oh, we need to get him down to the lake. So a couple of years later, we are here, and Dave is here, and he is going to be our keynote speaker. Then we're going to have a short break. We'll have, after his presentation, we'll have some questions and answers, if you like. And then we'll have I think we're going to have some chicken and potatoes and all kinds of good food for dinner. So if you've been hitting the desserts, that's fine, but save room. Then we have Phil Trex Grow Stocks. Sean Garland drove down from St. Louis as well. And he's going to talk all about this wonderful product that you can lay on the ground and has a wonderful medium in the middle. It's called black gold, or that's what we call it, especially when you don't have soil here at the lake to speak of. I think it was Sean or someone told me a man put one tomato plant in one and grew 80 pounds of tomatoes. So think about it. And you can have living walls, you know, you can plant them and they stack them on top of each other. You'll learn all about that. Then we have Rain Reserve, which is awesome, and it's all about rain catchment. And not just the rain barrel, by the way. This rain barrel back here at the back of the room, you all got a ticket for it. And for those of you that hang out to the end, we're going to have a drawing and give that away. So anyway, all about water catchment, and that's going to be Matt, and he's up from Marshfield. I saw you out there, Matt. Mansfield, there you go. Laura Ingalls Wilder's home, right? Okay. And that will be really, really wonderful because they've come up with a way you can save water under a deck. Think about it. Hundreds of gallons of water. So there's really great ideas that we're going to learn about that. We'll have a short break, and then we have a wonderful expert panel. Georgianne from Ameren is here to talk about vegetative buffer strips. We have Bob Rose down from Columbia, Mizzou, talk about soil erosion. We're going to have, and here we go, Mike just came in from Schultz Surveying and Engineering, talking about surveying stormwater around the lake. We'll have Ben Hartland, Landscape. Ben Evers from Heartland, he's going to talk. He's a partner, and we're going to have, let's see, we'll have Mark McDonald from Rockworks. And actually, we also have Don Hathaway's come in from Camden Planning and Zoning. So we have a panel of experts for Ask the Experts, so this will be great. And with that, let's get the show on the road and introduce Dave Tilka. Come on, Dave.
Thank you, Donna. Thanks for coming out tonight. I was told to put this here. That's good. Good evening.
And I'll go ahead with the chicken clicker.
In the center button there is your red pointer. May I record you?
Sure. All right. We love the lake as much as you folks. We came last summer. We wanted a nice, cool place to visit and celebrate our 40th wedding anniversary. So we got the kids, we rented a house for a couple of days, and we celebrated our 40th anniversary. The timing was spectacular, of course. Everything started turning brown. We had, of course, the nice drought. Everybody took off for the river, the water. And one of the most popular places was at Hahatonka, right where the spring branch came out. And a lot of you were, yeah, that was the coolest place to be on the lake. Even the deer, if you can you see that? Yeah. You're familiar with deer, huh? The deer were in the water during the daytime. They were so hot. So, Donna asked me to tell you a little bit about natives. Now, I don't know if I'm talking to the choir or not, but I'm going to be talking some basics about natives and exotics, or non-natives. And then I'm going to be giving you my perspective on what the lake and some of the challenges are as far as growing native plants, or plants in general. And then I will finish up with a couple of species. I hope all of you got the handout that I gave. There is a two-sided one-pager. On the one side, I have a quick and dirty explanation of natives versus exotics. And then on the back side, there is a compilation of 4 slides with some species recommendations. Everybody has their own species recommendations, so I thought I would add mine to probably many lists you've already gotten. But talking about natives, and so for the next 3 hours, we're going to be a species that naturally occurs in a particular region and has evolved in that region. Please understand, everything is native to somewhere, okay? And if you are, really particular about what a native is, you have to define what region you're talking about. For our purposes, we'll say the lower Midwest. So the species that I'll be talking about tonight will center on the lower Midwest. Some people say it's native to, central Missouri. Some people will say it's native to central United States. Some people will say it's native to the United States. But please understand, when we're talking natives, you have to sort of define your region. But because it has evolved in this region, it naturally interacts with the native wildlife and natural processes. I'm a natural process kind of guy. I like to go ahead and landscape to have natural processes, pollination, other things which I'll talk about. And it performs a natural function. A functional landscape is a happy landscape. A functional landscape is a healthy landscape. And that, I think, is what we want to strive for. And then through evolution, it has adapted to natural control mechanisms. This is important. Things like competitors, herbivores, primarily insects, disease agents, all these things sort of keep it in check. And it's a functioning, balanced, natural community. Okay? As opposed to an exotic species. You notice I've done some color. I've manipulated your mind. It's in red, so that's a bad one. Okay? Or not quite as not quite as good. All right? But it basically lives outside of the lower Midwest. It evolved in another region and has been unnaturally transported by humans to the Midwest across natural barriers. Okay? The problem is some of these transplants have evolved in similar climates, and they have become aggressive in our region because, again, the lack of constraints, the lack of competitors, herbivores, disease agents. When they were uprooted from Europe or China or some other place and brought into this area, they didn't bring all the other, natural control mechanisms with them. They just brought the pretty plant. And there's nothing wrong with that. We're all decorators. We're all decorators at, heart. But what happens is some of these guys, they get real aggressive. And they just start displacing the natives, and they contribute little to the natural processes. And sometimes some of the ecologists call them eye candy. They just look pretty. They don't really have function. So I hope I'm not offending anybody by referring to some of these as eye candy species, but little function. All right. So, why natives over exotics? Again, I think you probably know these, but native plants have adapted to our climate. So even when we have the drought of 2002, my wife and I did not water our landscape. Maybe a little bit occasionally, but for the most part, we didn't water it because natives can handle these stresses. Sure, they wilted. Sure, they got yellow. They didn't look as vibrant as they normally did, but they survived without much TLC. And they possess an interconnection, an environmental function, and a sense of purpose. If there is a native plant out there, there is probably a whole array of native animals that somehow utilize it, either directly or indirectly. And because of this coevolution, the plants and animals interconnect. Again, you don't get that connection when you bring in the exotics. It is a horrible plant. You know all about it. It takes over, it displaces, it greens up before and stays green later. It's shallow rooted. It basically provides some berries that are all sugar and nothing else for the birds. They don't get a lot of fats and some of the other needed things that, again, the native berry producers give. But we're realists too. We realize we're not telling everybody to yank out all their exotics. Get rid of all your hostas and things because that isn't going to happen. But please realize there are choices here. All right, let's try it here. All right, let's try here. Why landscape with natives and increase biodiversity? What are the benefits? First of all, benefits to humans. Because it is, I love the dynamic parade of change. It's a link to our natural heritage, again, wildlife watching, nature, intellectual stimulation, and economics. Economics is a biggie because with some of these eye candy species, you have to give them a lot of care. Benefits to native organisms, that goes without saying. Habitat for plants, habitat for animals, and the environment. And that's what a lot of what we're going to be talking about tonight. How can we keep that lake healthy? It increases biodiversity, it reduces ecological footprint, reduces toxins, restores function, and helps with the water quality of Lake of the Ozarks. All right, the aesthetics. The aesthetics of native plants. Oh. Technology, isn't it great? All right. I had some really pretty pictures with those. The loss of natural ecosystems and the need for ethics. Do we have any ethical people in the crowd? Don't be afraid, just let me know. We have some ethical people. Well, do you realize that 17% of the land on Earth is natural? 83% of it is human-dominated landscapes. Human-dominated landscapes. That's amazing. We have a big footprint on the earth. In the United States, according to Doug Tallamy, who wrote Bring Nature Home, it's a wonderful book. If you want some technology, I know a lot of the master naturalists have probably been introduced to it. In his recent talking schedule, he has gathered some data and says, in the contiguous lower 48, 5% is natural. 54% is urban development and 41% is agriculture. So where are the native plants, the native ecosystems? Where are they going to be? Especially if we're bringing in just these big expanses of eye candy and human-dominated landscapes. Well, we all know about wetlands. 90% are lost. We've lost 98, 99% of our prairies. And what have we replaced a lot of them with? Paved surfaces, 62,000 square miles of suburban lawns. That is astonishing. I can give you some states, like it's the size of, Pennsylvania. Some of these, it's amazing. And then when we start talking about our reproductive ethic and our ethic, because we all pollute, carbon footprint. I pollute, you pollute, all God's children pollute. So it's how much we pollute. That's what we're after. The classic example of the bad guy. And what happens, it starts invading with just a few. And then what happens? The few become many. And then it brings its cousin, the Japanese honeysuckle, along. And heavens to Murgatroyd, you know what happens then. That is non-functional. But we're saying is, not all natives are bad, like the red milkweed. If you love monarch caterpillars, this is a great larval food source. And what I tell people, if they want to bring in a butterfly bush, which is a native of China, Buddleia davidi, bring it in, but just keep it contained. Keep it close to your house so it doesn't escape out into the wild. Lord knows what would have happened if we would have kept our Callery pears and our Bradford pears close to the house. Because if you drive central Missouri here, they have escaped and they're getting out into the natural environment, which is not good. Okay, so we talked about this one. I'm going to buzz through this because we did see this one about the beneficiaries, the aesthetics of native plants, and Merv Walls will be talking about a lot of the aesthetics there, the change in the seasons, the food and cover for the wildlife. And this is one of my favorite slides. It was taken close to here, south of Jefferson City, by Tom Johnson, the state herpetologist. And I showed this to one group in St. Louis, and city folks versus country folks. The one woman says, "Oh my gosh, we have lizards that big in Missouri?" Of course, that's a fence lizard, 5 to 7 inches long. The house is she was not a student of photography as well, but again, where do people a lot of times get their nature information? From the TV. And again, she sees this and thinks, my God, I don't want those things around. But this is spice. That's what's so neat about native plants, native animals. It offers spice to life. And this is spice. Even garter snakes and other cool things like that. Well, the systems, we talked about this, 17%, 5%. We'll just buzz on through there. TV folks got that. All right, where do we find out what choices we have out there if we're not going to bring in eye candy from China? Well, when we start looking at the natural communities we have around the lake, again, we have forest, Ozark forests, and then we have a lot of times on the ridges, glades, which are wonderful communities. And then the prairies. Now we caught it. Okay, the wonderful prairies we have just a little bit west of here. And then, of course, the wonderful glades, these thin, rocky areas that provide a wonderful array of plants and animals. And then some of the savannas and the woodlands. big trees, and prairies underneath. Well, if you need more information on there, these are some of the resources that I am drawing from, especially when it comes to what species should I plant. Now, I'm promoting the book I wrote for the Conservation Department because it has some wonderful tables in there. I enlisted a lot of people to help me with those tables. We're particularly proud of that. Merv Wallace helped with those tables, a lot of qualified people. So it was a team effort, and I'm not making royalties off the book. I've already got my nickel 98 out of that from the Conservation Department. But Bring Nature Home, that's a wonderful book if you want to find out more information on this. But people say, how do you know if you have a good landscape, something that's really functional? And first of all, there are the intangibles. The intangibles. Furnish sensory enjoyment, stimulate the mind. And I can't help but think about kids. Kids, like you guys right there. All right, you guys. All right. There is the sense of wonder, that firsthand experience. There is a wonderful book out there, The Last Child in the Forest. You heard about that, some of you? There is a condition which is growing, unfortunately. It's called nature deficit disorder. And it's the chasm between kids and nature. And this author is really documenting some of the science. We thought about this, but now we get the science. It's sort of like what Tallamy's book did to the native landscaping movement. But the kids are the future stewards. Once we're gone from this world, you guys are going to be in charge of what happens in the environment. But we, in so many instances, we have demonized nature. And you look at some of the TV programs, and around our houses, we have sterilized it. We don't have a lot of opportunities to see nature. We have decreased our green spaces. Of course, you folks are fortunate. You have the lake in your backyard. But what we have done is we have increased electronic media. You know what I mean, right? So what we need is to have kids exposed to firsthand personal relationships with nature. Where do they get that? Where do they get that? And we can't depend upon TV for that firsthand experience. So when we're talking about successes, we're also talking about tangibles. We count the number of different plants and animals we have in our landscape. Biodiversity. We've heard that term. Basically, it means the number of different species of life that are present in an area. There are areas of high biodiversity, areas of low biodiversity. Low biodiversity, another term for that is monoculture. Mono. Mono meaning one, culture referring to plants. If you wanted a definition, it's 1, 2, or a few species of plants. 1, 2, or a few. It's boring. It's boring. You need diversity. You need variety in your life. Because a diversity of plants creates a diversity of wildlife. And areas of high biodiversity are exciting, add spice to life, like that fence lizard, like that little snake, like the butterflies, the songbirds, the hummingbirds. Monocultures are boring. I give an example in South St. Louis City. I have a friend that lives there. His landscape has zoysia grass and yew bushes. Pretty boring. Every once in a while, he gets a squirrel or a robin coming by. And he always gets after us. He says, we live in a jungle. But then he's out there, well, what's this? What's that? What's that? But his zoysia, and yews, that's a monoculture. We need to do better than that. Biodiverse landscapes are healthier. There's more species, more functioning, more checks and balances. Things do not get out of kilter. When he has webworms or some animals eating up his grass, he has to intercede and probably use chemicals. In a diverse community, you don't have to do that. Occasionally, you might have to do something, but there's less toxins, there's more resiliency to exotics, it's more sustainable. And that's what we're after, is sustainability. So, If we're going to buy native plants, native seeds, where do we go? Well, first of all, don't go to a can. I think we all know that. Don't buy meadow in a can. And I would encourage you not to go to the big retailers, because you don't know where the seed was obtained, how it was obtained. There's ethics in that. Okay? But so much of the stuff that's big on the market has been grown in Oregon and other places. It may do well here, but it may not. What I would encourage you to do is go to a local nursery who knows the source of the seed. They can probably tell you where specifically they got it, and you know they have ethically obtained the seed. This is good. And then try to go as local as possible, because if the seed was obtained 40 miles from here, it's probably adapted even better to our climate, our extremes, and it's going to do well during those droughts. What's this one? Yeah, that's a coneflower. Does that look normal? No. Or here's another one. Pretty, isn't it? Nice eye candy, you're right. This is blueberry pie. You can get these for, well, they started coming out and they were $99.95. I think they've gone down now, but is this natural? What do you think it's going to do to the insects? It will be, it's confusing to me. So when people say, should we use even the cultivars of some of these natives, like the coneflowers? Well, should we use them or not? And I say, well, you know what a cultivar is. You know what these things are. And they have been selected or bred by humans based upon one or more specific traits, and they're propagated to keep those traits. In fact, generally speaking, we're talking 70% of them are clones. They're genetic clones. And there's a certain amount of energy that a plant has. So it's either going to devote it to this particular characteristic or that, or in nature, there's a variation, but it's somewhat balanced. And when you talk about some of these cultivated varieties that bloom for long, long periods, well, it's at the expense of nectar production or pollen production. And they don't have to worry about, breeding and producing more of them, because they vegetatively clone them and they're going to produce them anyway. So use cultivars that are not radically different. In other words, never use cultivars with radically different flowers, like the cone flowers. Dwarfs are okay. If you're into aromatic sumac, a wonderful plant, the grow low varieties that give you that nice rounded mound, that's fine. And also, if you get into some of the red buds, the Diablos, and some of the other, where they change the color of the leaves, you're messing up the edibility to certain other organisms. So avoid cultivars labeled resistant to insects, because we're going to find out insects are good. Insects are very good. And then monitor. If you don't see anything happening around those cultivars, give them to your neighbor, compost them, but they're not really doing more than just eye candy. All right. So if we're measuring success, we got the intangibles, we got the intangibles, we got the tangibles, then we're after function. And what I mean by function is dating and mating, pollination, predation, carnivores feeding, herbivores feeding. This is all good. This is all great. So if you see dating and mating in your landscape, you're doing something right. If you see pollination, when some of these little skipper butterflies go from flower to flower, that is good. Predation, it doesn't have to be grizzly bears and salmon. It can be spiders. Again, you kids like to watch flowers and see all the different things, the pollinators coming in, the butterflies? You like to see that? Yeah. And sometimes you'll see spiders, sometimes you'll see crab spiders that grab some of these things. And then there's always the garter snake that eats the frog, or mud daubers. Mud daubers control spiders. So all these things are built in, they're all interconnected. And one of the coolest things, I had to call my neighbors and say, come on over, look at all this stuff. I got a praying mantis that just caught a 5 lion skink ate its head off. It's got a drumstick in its mouth right there. But that's cool. That is a functioning, I hope all of you get to see some of these predatory and these dating and mating and these pollination, because this is a good functioning habitat. Now, is everything going to be great? Are you going to have any interactions that are maybe not quite always positive? Well, yeah. You're going to get some interactions. And then, wait a minute, can you see there? There's the leaves are all eaten up by the insects. Get out the can of spray. What do you think? No, no, no. But wait a minute. Hostas and daylilies, all those leaves look intact. Why? Why? Well, it has to do with herbivorous insects. Herbivorous insects are good. And you're going to think I'm crazy here for a minute. But realize that herbivorous insects, over a third of the animals in the world are herbivorous insects. They're out there. What good are they? They are a vital link to songbirds. People say, I want more songbirds. Oh, but don't give me those insects. But don't realize that you have one and it gets the other. If you have insects, you're going to have songbirds. Food web. Native plants attract insects that attract songbirds. And almost all North American birds, they feed their young insects. Pound for pound, more protein than beef. In other countries, they know that better. They eat insects. We don't. But here is the reason. Exotic plants generally contain chemicals in their leaves that make them unpalatable to our native insects. And that's why the hostas, the daylilies, and some of these other things, they aren't eaten. But if they're not eaten, they're not doing their job, their function in the environment. And some of the best indicators, community health, are the caterpillars that eat them, the caterpillar usage. There is a big group called the Lepidoptera. They're the butterflies and moths. If you get this, you're doing something right in your landscape. If caterpillars are eating things in your landscape, that's good. And they're not going to overeat because you're going to have songbirds and other things that are going to eat these guys. They're all kept in check. Doug Tallamy did some wonderful studies with his graduate assistant, Slopshire. Anyway, she put this data actually out there so we can see it. When we look at Lepidopteran use of herbs. Now, Lepidopteran, most studied, there's a lot of information on them. So they said how many species of butterflies and moths will eat certain genera of plants. Like goldenrods, asters, you can see dozens. You talk about the exotic eye candy, cannas, zinnias. When you get down to liriope, lily turf, pampas grass, daylilies. Look at how many caterpillars eat daylilies. Look at how many caterpillars eat hostas, tulips, zipperoni. Because they just don't have, the digestive, genetics here to eat it. And it's even more with woodies. Look at oaks. Yay, oaks. 518 species eat oaks. Willows. Talking with willows with Sean. Willows are wonderful. Sure, people think they overtake, and some of them do. You got to be selective in your species. Birches, maples, dogwoods, hawthorns. These are good. Then you look at privets. Privets are fairly good, but then you get the boxwoods, crepe myrtles, the butterfly bush, again, native of China, forsythia. They just don't produce the insect food. So, how do you relate that now to the lake? Let's get back. You've had this before, the 3 S's. You've had this all right. Slow it down, spread it out, soak it up. But when you look at the ecological challenges of the Lake of the Ozarks, there are some steep-sided landscapes, large expanses of shallow-rooted turf grasses. Contribute little. You've seen these before with the root structures. The typical bluegrass roots they don't absorb much. You go to the natives, they're used to this. They have evolved here. We rented our house. We looked out over the arm of the cove here, and we saw some things that weren't pretty, okay? There is the active wave action at shoreline, but instead of a typical lake that is surrounded by bottomland soils and vegetation, this lake is surrounded, of course, by upland soils and upland vegetation. And that is a big challenge. That is a very big challenge. One that you folks have been dealing with quite a bit here. So, Bob, I hope you don't get offended at my oversimplification here, but when you look at the soil differences between bottomland soils of the Ozarks and upland soils of the Ozarks, when you get to the bottomlands, they tend to have smaller soil particles that have washed down the slopes and they accumulate at the slope base. They tend to have richer soils that retain the moisture better. Then they naturally they're naturally located on relatively flat topography at the base of the slope. And they generally support faster growing softwoods, okay? That's a oversimplified breakdown of bottomland soils. Again, compared to upland soils, larger particles, they resist being washed down the slope. They tend to be poor soils that drain fast. They naturally are on the slope topography, and they generally support slower growing hardwoods. Now, I got an asterisk on this side because a lot of this has to do with slope aspect. Slope aspect, anybody know what slope aspect means? How steep it is, but which way it is oriented. Is it oriented?
South or north?
Right, it's the compass directions. It's the compass directions. So, at the risk of oversimplifying, you have your south and west facing slopes, and you have your north and east facing slopes. This really has a tremendous impact on what you might want to choose to put on your landscapes. So when you're out there, you get your compass out. Or you probably know where the sun rises and the sun sets. You already know that, probably. But it is one of the major factors that determines what plants will grow where. Because the south and west facing slopes, they're a lot drier than the north and east facing slopes. Why? What two factors? Sun, but what about sun? Afternoon sun versus morning sun, a lot warmer. Also, besides sun, what? Wind. When you get the afternoon winds, they will dry out the vegetation more on the west and south faces. So it's going to be a lot drier. Also, the impact on the leaves that fall down. How much organics is going to actually stay there on the soil? Or it's going to be dry, crinkly leaves, they're going to be blown down very quickly. The landowner may have to select glade-like native species, xeriscaping, because everything is too dry to grow really wet-loving things on that south and west-facing slope. As compared to the north and east-facing slopes, again, they get the morning sun, they don't get the drying winds, and generally speaking, they are a lot more moist. What does this do when it talks about, when you consider the leaves that fall off the trees? Wet leaves don't migrate. They're not as easily blown down the hillside. So if you have this organic matter, it will stay on the sticky, wet slopes, relatively speaking, more than the south and west facing slopes. And this will add organic matter to your slope. And it may allow the landowner to plant more prairie type species, or maybe some woodland forest wildflowers. All right. Then the lesson, and Bob and I were talking about this before. We learn from nature. Rather than fight the natural character of the land, go with it mimic the attractive features of the surrounding natural communities. So we can't all have certain pictures we see in magazines. That's like some of the crazies that go to Phoenix, Arizona. They're from the east. They say, oh man, I miss my bluegrass lawn or my big deciduous trees. They take them out there. But they don't do well because, again, you're fighting the character. Of course, the allergists, there weren't many allergists in Phoenix, Arizona before all the Easterners brought their things out. Now they have allergists because they didn't have the allergens, but that's another story. But think about this. Why fight? A lot of the hillsides surrounding the lake are uplands. You can't always bring in bottomless species unless you're right at that shoreline where you have that interface between the lake and, the shore. And when we lived for a few days in our house last summer, we had a few of these guys. Anybody ever seen these? Oh yeah. If you have these guys, do you think you have a real moist environment? No. We found 5 of them in our bedroom. We knew we weren't, in a moist mesic forest, okay? Because these are glade lovers. These are glade lovers. Now, when you look at this aspect, you can see it right here by Hahatonka. You see the dry slope over here? There you have a glade. The trees are somewhat scattered. Over here you have trees. You have more moisture. Look at the tree difference, the color of the vegetation. These are a little stressed, but they're living there. They're going to survive. But again, slope aspect means so much when you're trying to pick out species. So get your books out, get your references out, start looking what species. And I have, again, my recommended species, the basic 7 when it comes to forest. These all, they're on the back side. Don't copy these down. You already got them on your sheet. All of these species here do well if you have nice north and east facing slopes, or you live in a bottomland area where there's good soil, good moisture. These are all wonderful. It's really hard to kill these guys, okay, types of plants. Now, some may not do real well, especially if they get them full sun. The dwarf crested iris does not take full sun. Some people have problems with Solomon seal. The deer have no problem with it at all. They love Solomon seal. That's their lettuce. They love Solomon seal. But these are wonderful plants, give you wonderful color. Looking out from our deck, we basically group these. We mulch them in a little bit because we live higher on the ridge also. But this is I love to get out there and just walk around and see the colors that come out. The colors. And again, the celandine poppy, the blue phlox, these are wonderful color combinations. And again, if you have a shaded woodland, it's a wonderful, and columbine, the little nectaries are way up here. That's why the hummingbirds have to hover. The Jacob's ladder, wonderful compound leaves. Solomon seal, yes. The hosta substitutes. But a lot of hillsides have the sun. Sun, you have to go to a different palette. You have to go to a different palette. So if you have more rich, moist soils on the north and east facing slopes, you can probably have more prairie species. They tend to be taller. They tend to be taller, okay? Because they can get more photosynthesis, they can grow a little taller, they're not handicapped by a lack of moisture like the glade plants are. So these are also listed on your sheet. These are all wonderful prairie plants. And once established, they are usually pretty long-lived for the most part. They're perennials. You don't have to plant them every year. What you might have to do is cut them down. Some people will use a little fire management. But these are all wonderful plants. There is a lake in Minnesota. Again, they don't have the wave action that you do here, but that's a neat array of those prairie-type plants. Again, the coneflowers, the blazing stars, the bergamots, the rattlesnake master. Asters are wonderful places for insects. You get the honeybee, you get the fly bee, the bee mimic fly, you get the butterflies. The butterflies love a lot of these wildflowers. And one of my favorite, the orange butterfly milkweed. It's a great plant. And you don't have to be fancy with these things. You can basically, if you live on a steep slope, you can put a terrace, a trench, and fill it in with a little bit of soil if you want. If you don't have, again, this north and east facing slope, rattlesnake master, another wonderful plant. The Rudbeckias, the black-eyed Susans. If you like red, the royal catchfly is a wonderful. Now again, these are all tall. If you would put them in singularly, they might bend over. Okay? They become more lanky. You've got to put them in a mass. But this is what insects like. And one of my favorite, with all the moths, the hummingbird moths that come in, and the bees and the butterflies, the bergamots are wonderful. If you have, though, this is outside the house we lived in, you try to put these plants here on this rock, and yeah, they aren't going to live. They aren't going to live. So you need to go ahead and go with the glade-like plants. They're shorter. They are adapted to the poor and dry soils. Again, work with the nature of the environment, the natural communities. Again, these are in your sheets, so you have these species listed. But the indigos, the blue false, they've come out with the yellow in the last 3-4 years. The blue stars, threadleaf blue star, is a wonderful glade plant. Its cousin, the other blue star, the shining leaf, I think that's the plant of the year at Missouri Wildflowers. That likes it a little more moist. But the fame flower, the rock pink, wonderful plant. The coneflowers, my favorite coneflower is actually the glade coneflower. It is adapted to these dry conditions. Adapted to the dry conditions. Golden Alexander's a nice bit of yellow. The Missouri primrose, you gotta have this. If you live here in Missouri, you gotta have a Missouri primrose. The pagoda plant, the downy phlox, that's a pink variety of the blue one that lives in the forest. But this one is mildly aggressive. But if you have a rocky hillside, you want to fill it in, sometimes this is pretty special, especially when it flowers for several weeks. The purple poppy mallow, it's easy for you to say, purple poppy mallow. And one of my favorites, it's a low-growing rose verbena, another you gotta have it if you have a glade. It is one of the longest flowering of the wildflowers. It's 6-8 inches tall, and it starts flowering about the beginning of April and well into September, October. It does take a little dip in the summer when it gets really hot, but it's a wonderful plant. And then groundsel or squawweed, some people are offended by the name. I hope I'm not offending you. It's the Senecio or Paccara. But these indigos are beautiful. They're like sweet peas. They are beautiful. The blue is more like a mound, about 2 or 3 feet high. The cream doesn't bloom as long, but it's a low-growing. It really loves glades. And then there is the yellow. That's the one that has come into the market, I guess, in the last 4 years or so. Here is the mound. And this was a south-facing part of our house, and it was hot. The heat came down and just really created a heat island here. The indigos just love it. The indigos love it. And there's the rose verbena with the cream wild indigo, And then there is the squawweed or groundsel. When they put up their seed heads, they're quite colorful. Then they die back. They have the seeds like dandelions. And then sometimes you have to take your weed whacker, and that also will spread, the squawweed. But if you have a hot, dry area and you want a low ground cover, it's a wonderful plant. Rose verbena, again, you gotta have it. You gotta have it. Fame flower. This is, if you like succulents, a lot of people don't put out cactus. There is a prickly pear cactus that is native, but this gives you a nice color splash. They're little succulent fingers like cacti, but they have these beautiful pink flowers that are wonderful. They grow in the rocks in central Missouri here, over in the igneous rocks, over in St. Francis Mountains. They are a wonderful plant, and a lot of people put these in pots and put them on their decks where it's hot. They love hot. They love heat. And then the Missouri primrose. Good ground cover, nice round mound. Sometimes they die out. The older ones die out in the center, but I always take those seeds and scatter them back in the center to keep the population going. But for the size of the plant and the size of the flower, you cannot beat Missouri primrose. Wonderful plant. In fact, we had an area that was so hot and dry, we said, we're going to mimic the glade. We're going to pretend like that's a glade there. And we pretended like there was layers of dolomite, just like in the glades that, that are so common in the Ozarks. And we put out a few plants, and we got really some nice color. Nice color. There's that pink phlox, that downy phlox. And there you can see another view of that downy phlox. Beautiful color, but I had to control it. You got to watch it. You got to chase it a little bit, because that will spread. But that's when you got a lot of other soil to colonize. But in a rocky area, you'll see downy phlox along roadsides, rocky roadsides. And you can see the two coneflowers there, the glade and then the pale purple. But look at the color difference in the purple. It is really spectacular. And then the threadleaf blue star, nice mound, sort of fern-like, thin leaves, a wonderful plant. It loves the heat. It loves the rocks. And when you're looking at the list Ameren has, the vegetation, I would encourage this area right here is begging for shrubs. Begging for shrubs. And you got, all these low-growing plants, but go with some shrubs as well and small trees. Buttonbush. For people that says, I love to have butterfly bush from China. Well, you can have some, but this is a good native substitute for Buddleia davidi, this cephalanthus, this buttonbush. And this would grow well right along the shoreline. Now, it does spread mildly, but it's a wonderful plant to have. Wonderful plant to have. The deciduous holly up on the hillsides. The false indigo, it gets tall. It is a wonderful food source for a lot of caterpillars. It likes it along the shoreline. Again, this list is on your backside. You folks already know about flowering dogwood. The fragrant sumac, it likes it dry. Again, it can withstand the heat. And you can go with the nativar, the growlow, because the flower is intact. It is a cultivar of the wild fragrant sumac. Lead plant, if you have a real dry area, this loves the heat as well. It's got gray foliage. It's a wonderful color combination. It's got purple and yellow. I'll show you a picture of that in a minute. 9 bark. It does real well around the shoreline. Ozark witch hazel. You gotta have one of these. They started flowering like 4 weeks, 5 weeks ago. And I'll show you a picture. They have these beautiful spider-like flowers with yellow. And it's neat to have flowers that have a couple of different colors in them. But this one is a spectacular one, and it's readily available. Redbud, you know about that. Red cedar, you need some more red cedar out here? But don't get down on red cedar because it's a wonderful roost for songbirds. In the nighttime, the winter when we have these little pop-up, ice storms, and the birds really depend upon red cedar. So we tend to poo-poo, the red cedar, but it's really a great plant. It's very versatile. And the only green butterfly, the olive hair streak, they eat red cedar leaves, the olive hair streak. So if you like green butterflies, you need some more eastern red cedar. Rough-leaf dogwood, if you have an area that you're really trying to colonize, it will spread. It's a good screen. Rusty black-haw viburnum. It does well in the rocky soil. Really a good one. Serviceberry, you know about that. And then shrubby St. John's wort. If you have a place where you want formalized bushes, this is good. It has spectacular yellow color. It's more the formal front yard species. And then if you have some rich, moist soil, the wild hydrangea. So these are wonderful. Buttonbush, that starburst pattern. I love those flowers. It looks like it's something out of Star Wars. Like, exploded. And the bees, the butterflies love it. The close-up of the shrubby St. John's wort. Just a wonderful plant. The ninebark have these wonderful clusters. Small butterflies and insects love to pollinate these guys. There's the Ozark witch hazel. Doesn't that look like a spider to you, in a way? But look at those yellow and then the maroon centers, and they have this neatest fragrance. And they are the first native woody in Missouri to flower. And they like it. They find them on gravel bars, where it gets a little dry, but it has wet feet. And they're a wonderful shrub to have. Wonderful shrub. The Ozark witch hazel. And it's neat to smell these things when you're walking in late winter. You're out there in the end of January and beginning of February, you can smell these. And they have a wonderful fragrance. They're pollinated actually by flies, but not house flies, the ones, but the good flies. There's good flies and bad flies. All right, here's the lead plant. You can't see the close-up, but interesting compound leaves, and the wild hydrangea. All right, the flowering dogwood, when you talk about fruits, they are spectacular with that red fruit. All right. After a slow start, we got into the program here, but if you don't remember anything about this, 3 concepts I would like for you to take home. Number 1, mimic nature in your landscape. Don't fight it. Mimic it. If you want to see what something is like on Glades, go out and visit some of these communities. And then see what appeals to you, where the action is, where there's a lot of pollination. And say, oh, gosh, I would love that in my yard. I would like to share that with my kids. Second one, choose functional over the exotic eye candy. Okay? Functional natives over the shallow-rooted traditional turf grass are the exotic eye candy. Okay? Does that mean get rid of everything? No. But at least bring more natives. If you have choices, always weigh what is going to be more functional. And then strive for high biodiversity rather than monocultures. A diversity of plants, a diversity of animals. It's a healthier environment. And I want to congratulate the organization here. They have, what do you call them, TVEs, Trained Volunteer Evaluators. This is similar. We have a similar program in St. Louis with Brain Conservation Home. Last year we went out and visited about 115 different landscapes and gave the people specific instructions on what opportunities are out there, how they should manage their rainwater, identified some of their plants that maybe like bush honeysuckle and other things that they need to get rid of, but it was a one-on-one relationship, and that is a wonderful program by LOA, And it's really great having this opportunity available. So with that, I will shut up. Thank you very much for being patient with the technological problems at the beginning, and we'll see how we're doing on time.
I think we're doing very good. And if anyone has a question, now would be a time to ask that.
Questions?
How do you tell what native plants are not, some native plants to me can become invasive. So how do you tell, like bamboo, how do you tell what native plants would not become invasive?
Can you reiterate the question?
She's saying, how can I tell what native plants can be invasive and which ones cannot? There are lists. In the book that I wrote, I have a little section on which things are mildly aggressive or which ones you should avoid altogether. But sometimes if you want to screen, like rough-leaf dogwood, if you want it to spread, or if you have a plant like squawweed, if you have this area and it just won't fill in, and you want something that is aggressive, that maybe will outcompete, maybe the opportunistic weeds, you have things like that, like squawweed. Wild petunia, once it gets established, it tends to take over, and it is a prolific seed producer. But if you have, like where I showed you with that bank side where the two kayaks were, there's not a lot of growth there. You have to put in something that is mildly aggressive. So you almost have to do your homework, but then realize you can sometimes take advantage, again, of the somewhat aggressive nature of some things, but some things you shouldn't put out.
I mean, like my yard's been taken over by the yucca. It just, you just can't get, and you almost have to sell your house and put a contract on the house because there's everyone in the
Well,
yucca.
yeah, and some of these exotics, crown vetch, trefoil, some of these, once they're established, what happens also to complicate things is they put the seeds on the ground, and you might get rid of all the adult plants, but a lot of times what you get are the volunteer seeds. And if you do that, you don't want to disturb the soil, because sometimes they work their way down the soil, and when you want to till them up and get rid of, then all of a sudden you bring all these other weed seeds. So yeah, you gotta do your homework, but sometimes you can take advantage, like that downy phlox. It is mildly aggressive, but again, if you have the hillside and you want to get something established there, so take advantage of the nature. Yes, ma'am.
I wonder if you could talk a little bit about the practice here at the lake of getting rid of the native vegetation on the lake slopes, putting down black weed barriers, and then putting crushed rocks.
On top.
You see that a lot. Could you talk about that?
The question was, some people practice getting rid of some of the existing native vegetation, putting down black plastic, and then putting rock on top. Well, again, and I think that might be addressed by other people on erosion. I think Bob might be picking up on that, but you're encouraging soil particles to be washed down the hill. There's nothing there that will hold on to those soil particles. And it may cut down on maintenance, but you're harming the lake. It's not good. It's not good. And yeah, go ahead. You had a follow-up. Again, you probably want, and I don't want to take his material away either.
Go right ahead.
But also, after 2 years, it's awfully hard to keep the weeds out of that stuff. And you'll see them, they're just pristine, they're just rocks. And so something has to be used to get rid of those weeds, and that can't be good.
When you expose anything, again, you're opening it up for the opportunistic weeds, which a lot of times are the exotics, and that's, you're saying maybe I won't have to maintain it then, but you will have to down the road with bringing in these colonizers, and the colonizers are brought in with the air and other sources. They may be washed down off the road, like the bush honeysuckle. Again, exposed soil or nothing growing there, that's even more of a carrot for them to take hold. But yeah, it is. I guess it's just to try to,
They're second home, so they're not wanting to spend
Yeah, it's trying to cut down on the maintenance, but if you would establish the natives on some of this stuff, they would farm a good it takes sometimes, if you do it from seed, it takes probably 3 years to really get a good established prairie or glade before it can survive. But there is no maintenance-free landscape that's green and functional. The rocks may be an attempt to do this, and maybe you can get away with it, but you're not helping the health of the lake.